The war was over. The Iron Throne melted, King's Landing a city of ghosts and rubble. The Dragon Queen was dead, the realm was rebuilding, and the heroes of Westeros had all gone their separate ways. Arya Stark, however, didn't go west like she had promised. She disappeared. Not into the shadows, not into the seas, but into whispers. The girl who had once been no one had become something else, something more terrifying than a faceless assassin. She became a myth, a tale soldiers told each other around campfires, a ghost in royal chambers, a shadow in the shape of old kings, and new. It started with Lord Mertens of Duskendale. He had taken the small folks' grain during a harsh winter and let dozens starve. One night he opened his eyes to see King Robert Baratheon standing at the foot of his bed, crowned and grim. By sunrise the Lord's throat was slit, and his guards claimed the killer vanished into the walls. Then came Sir Baron of Gulltown, who sold orphans into slavery across the narrow sea. He was found drowned in his own wine cellar, his body. Broken and nearby, painted in blood on the stone wall, was a stag's crown. Again the whispers rose. "She walks the night in the faces of kings," they said. Arya had not forgotten her list, but she'd made a new one. Not for revenge this time, for order. In her eyes the realm had fallen into chaos, not because of warlords or queens, but because no one feared the consequences anymore. Justice was a game for the rich and born. So she changed the rules. She wore their faces, the great kings of old, Aegon the Conqueror, Robert Baratheon, even Rhaegar, whose face she stole from old Valyrian texts and whispers. Every death she dealt, she gave a message. The king has spoken. Arya no longer killed for survival or for honor. She killed because the world needed to remember fear. A faceless girl could only do so much, but a 1,000-year legacy of dead kings could move mountains. Sansa heard of it first from a terrified envoy. The man trembled while speaking of the Ghost Crown, a legend spreading from the Reach to the Vale. When she asked for details, he stammered something about Ned Stark's face seen atop a pike, in a dream before his lord was murdered. Sansa's hands trembled, but she kept her voice steady. "You say my father appeared before this man died?" "Yes, your grace." "As clear as the dawn," he said. He said the king passed. Judgment. That night Sansa cried alone in her chambers. She had prayed Arya was simply traveling, discovering herself. But this was something else. Bran, the broken king, knew. His eyes, now seeing through time and memory, had watched her. He told no one, not even Sansa. Perhaps he feared her. Perhaps he understood her too well. "She's not lost," he whispered to the weirwood one night. "She's become what the world made her." In the free cities, whispers followed Arya too. The House of Black and White had sent a faceless man to find her. He never returned. They said she now carried faces they didn't even know existed. Somehow, using the magic of the old world, blood magic, to wear faces without death. Faces of kings who'd long turned to dust. She'd become something new, not just faceless, but every face. And in a crumbling holdfast on the King's Road, a young boy heard footsteps in the night. He had stolen bread. He had stabbed a beggar for coin. He was just a boy. But when he turned, he saw the face of Aegon the Conqueror. A sword glowed in the dark, and a deep voice said, "You cannot be forgiven." Arya no longer asked if they deserved death. She had become death. Word spread, faster than any raven could fly. The common folk spoke of Arya as a myth, a tale to frighten greedy lords and corrupt knights. But for those who ruled, her name became a curse, spoken only behind closed doors, whispered through trembling lips. In the Red Keep, though half burned and half rebuilt, Queen Sansa Stark gathered her council to discuss a shadow haunting the realm. They didn't dare say it aloud, but every noble knew what they feared. Arya Stark was killing again. Lord Royce, once confident and full of pride, now avoided windows. He recounted how a masked man dressed in the armor of King Viserys I had stood outside his gates and vanished by morning, only to have his steward found flayed behind the stables. No one saw the killer enter or leave. No prints, no trace. "She's sending messages," Sansa murmured, her voice sharp as ice. "And she's using our ancestors to do it." Arya Stark is your sister, your grace, Sir Baelor said carefully. Surely you can reach her. Sansa turned to him, her expression unreadable. That girl I knew died years ago. What walks now? I don't know if it listens to reason. In the shadows of the great sept ruins, Arya knelt alone, surrounded by candles. Before her were 6 faces, none human anymore, masks of kings, treated like relics. They were preserved through dark arts she'd learned across seas and shadows. She had returned to the Free Cities years ago, demanding answers, breaking rules the faceless men had kept sacred for centuries. And when they denied her what she wanted, she bled them for it. Now, she possessed faces even the House of Black and White had never touched. Every time she wore one, she felt them, not just their skin, but their thoughts, their regrets, their hatred, their pride, Robert's bloodlust, Aegon's fire, the cold silence of King Maegor. Each one added to her, shaping her voice, her movement, her justice. And she had begun to lose herself. Sometimes she forgot what Arya Stark even sounded like. She stood and chose the face of Rhaegar Targaryen. There was a man who understood both love and duty, and in the end had failed both. She wore his face like a confession and headed for Blackhaven, where Lord Selwyn Dondarrion ruled with an iron fist and a gold tongue. He'd been stealing from tax coffers, murdering dissenters, and bedding daughters of farmers, only to discard them in the woods. Arya didn't kill him that night. She made him kneel. With Rhaegar's face, she demanded his men watch, that they remember the prince who died for peace, now returned to punish those who used power like a whip. Then she whispered a name, Lyanna, before plunging a dagger through his gut and leaving his body in the town square, naked, crowned, and marked with the words, "False kings die screaming." The realm began to fracture under the weight of fear. In the Riverlands, a new rebellion stirred. Peasant leaders called themselves the Crownless. Inspired by Arya, they began executing corrupt tax collectors and knights, leaving crowns made of bone beside their victims. In the north, House Karstark refused to send soldiers to support Sansa, claiming the true king walks again, and she wears many faces. Arya never meant to start a movement, but when she heard what the peasants were doing in her name, she didn't stop them. She told herself they were right. One night, as she stared into a cracked mirror in the ruins of Harrenhal, she tried to speak her name. "Arya Stark," she whispered, but it felt distant, hollow. She put on the face of King Aerys next, the Mad King. She had sworn she'd never use it, but something in her wanted to know how madness felt. She expected fire and chaos, but instead she felt sorrow, and a voice in her head, old and broken, said, "I wanted to burn it all because I couldn't fix anything." That night, Arya wept behind a dead man's face, but by morning she had killed again. The sun rose blood-red over Riverrun. Arya had vanished again, just as word of her latest execution spread like wildfire. This time it was Sir Garan Frey, a minor lord with a cruel reputation, found dead in his banquet hall, his throat slit from ear to ear, his mouth stuffed with cooked wolf meat. His family tried to cover it up, but the servants spoke of a man in silver armor, tall, calm and crowned like Aegon the Conqueror, walking through the keep as if no door could stop him. By now, there were dozens of stories, too many to ignore. Some claimed Arya could walk through walls. Others said she summoned wights wearing kingly faces. A few believed she was dead, and that the gods had turned her into vengeance itself. But those who knew her, who had once loved her, remained silent. They feared saying her name would summon her, and still, Sansa could not remain still. She rode to Winterfell alone, leaving the capital under the watch of her council. Bran had refused to speak on the matter. Jon was gone beyond the wall. Arya was her responsibility now. At Winterfell, she walked the snow-covered grounds they'd once known as children, the same godswood, the same quiet halls, but it no longer brought her peace. There were too many memories, too many ghosts, and as she stood beneath the ancient weirwood tree, she felt it, a presence, cold and knowing. She turned slowly. Arya stood there, not wearing a king's face, not cloaked in shadow, just herself, dressed in simple grey, her face hard, her eyes old. "Hello, Sansa," she said. Her voice was flat, empty. It didn't sound like a sister. "You've become a monster," Sansa replied. Arya blinked slowly, her hands resting at her sides. "No, I've become what monsters fear." Sansa stepped forward. "Do you even remember why you started? Do you remember Father's voice? Mother's touch? You were a child once, Arya. You loved life, you believed in justice." Arya smiled faintly, and for a moment her face softened. "I believed in stories. Justice doesn't exist unless someone enforces it. You rule from thrones. I rule from the shadows. We both clean the rot." Sansa's voice broke. "But with kings' faces, why? Why not your own?" Arya stepped closer, her eyes sharp. "Because Arya Stark doesn't terrify the wicked. But Maegor the Cruel does. Rhaegar Targaryen does. Eris Aegon. They linger in the minds of men. Their shadows weigh more than my name ever did. I wear them to make tyrants feel the breath of history on their necks." Sansa's hands clenched. "You've lost yourself." Arya nodded. "Maybe, but I've found something bigger. People rise in my name, the poor, the broken, the forgotten. They call me queen now, but not one who sits on a throne. Do you think Father would be proud of you?" That question pierced her more than any blade. Arya turned away, her breath shaky. "I don't know. He did what he thought was right, and they chopped his head off. Maybe I'm just finishing what he started, but differently, my way." Silence settled between them, heavy as snow. Then Arya whispered, "I only came to see you." "To say goodbye." Sansa stepped forward, tears in her eyes. "You don't have to leave. You can stay. You can be Arya again." But Arya only shook her head. "I haven't been Arya in years," she said quietly. "I don't even hear my voice when I speak anymore." She turned and walked into the woods. No farewell, no final words, just the sound of her feet in snow and wind. And Sansa, Queen of the North, watched her sister disappear like a ghost. That night, 5 more noblemen were found dead across the Vale. Each wore a crown carved from ice. Each had their eyes removed. The message was clear. The kings were watching. The South bled under the cold rule of fear. What had begun as Arya's solitary crusade now echoed like wildfire across the 7 kingdoms. Peasant militias called themselves the Bloodborne. They painted the sigils of ancient kings onto shields made of scrap metal. They hung the severed hands of tax collectors from trees, each one marked with the same sigil, a crown split down the center. But Arya didn't lead them. She didn't command, didn't organize, didn't recruit. She inspired, that was enough. In Old Town, the masters whispered of ancient prophecy. A shadow queen who wore the skins of fallen kings. A girl child with 100 faces and no soul. Some said she was the ghost of vengeance, summoned by the gods to cleanse corruption. Others feared she was no mortal at all, something born of blood magic and loss. But in truth, Arya was still flesh and bone, still haunted by names she couldn't forget. Gendry's name still stung when she thought of it. He had written to her once, after learning what she'd done to the Lords of the Stormlands. His letter was short, pleading, "This isn't you. Come home." She never answered it. But she kept the letter folded into her tunic, tucked behind daggers and poison vials, like a wound that refused to heal. She had moved into the shadow of the Eyrie now. The Vale had been quiet for too long, its lords bloated with wealth, untouched by war. But Arya had not forgotten how they refused to help during the Starks' darkest days, how they hid behind stone and claimed neutrality while her family was butchered. Now they would learn the price of indifference. Lord Alvar Royce, cousin to the Vale's warden, hosted a banquet to celebrate his daughter's betrothal to a Lannister cousin, an alliance meant to stabilize the region. Musicians played, banners flew, and wine flowed like water. Until the king arrived, not one invited, not one alive. In the middle of the feast, a man cloaked in black stepped through the open doors, tall, lean, wearing the cruel smile of King Maegor the Cruel. His crown gleamed under torchlight. His voice sent a chill through every guest. "I come bearing a gift," he said. He opened a burlap sack and rolled out the head of a local tax magistrate, one who had doubled the tithes on the poor during winter. Gasps filled the hall, swords were drawn, and within seconds all light was gone. Arya extinguished every flame, moved like a wraith. The scream of steel and blood echoed through stone. When the fires were finally rekindled, Lord Alvar was dead, his chest carved open in the shape of the Ares sigil, and his guards had been disarmed, literally. Written in blood on the banquet table, neutrality is another word for cowardice. Arya vanished before the sun rose. But this time, she didn't travel alone. She took the bride. The young Royce girl, barely 17, had watched her father beg for his life and die anyway. Yet instead of weeping, she'd stared into Arya's eyes with something else, curiosity, not fear. And when Arya turned to leave, the girl followed, without asking. She didn't speak much. Her name was Elira. Her face was pale, her eyes sharp. And somewhere between the Vale and the Crownlands, Arya gave her a choice. "I can teach you," she said, "but not mercy, not kindness, only truth." Elira had nodded. "I don't want to be a lady. I want to be remembered." Arya smiled. For the first time in weeks, now there were two ghosts wearing dead kings' faces. Sansa, back in King's Landing, felt the kingdom unraveling beneath her hands. Dozens of houses had gone silent. Raven messages returned unopened, or worse, blood-stained. The Crown's authority had begun to fade. The small folk no longer prayed to the Seven. They prayed to her, to the crowned shadow. In council meetings, her name was banned. Speaking it was treason. But Sansa knew. The real threat wasn't war. It was belief. King's Landing burned again, not with fire and dragons, but with fear and silence. Entire districts had emptied overnight, not from war, but from whispers. Whispers that the dead kings had returned, that their judgment was absolute, that no throne was safe. Sansa tried to hold the realm together, but she felt it slipping through her fingers. Her lords were cowards, her banners thin, and even among her own guard she sensed hesitation. How many of them believed Arya's justice was more honest than her crown? The scariest thing wasn't the killings. It was how right they felt. Arya didn't kill innocent people. She didn't attack the weak. She punished the untouchable, the vile, the protected, the cruel. But now, she had taken a child, Elira Royce, a noble girl, stolen from her own wedding feast. And yet, when ravens were sent demanding her return, Elira responded with one sentence: "I left, and I will return wearing a crown of my own." The message struck like lightning across the realm. Arya had an heir, no longer just a lone shadow. She was creating something bigger. A legacy, a doctrine, a kingdom beneath the skin of kings. Sansa summoned the last person who could understand Arya. She wrote to Jon Snow. Weeks passed. He came. His beard was thicker now, his eyes colder. But he knelt before her, like he always had, and said softly, "Where is she?" Sansa gave him everything, the letters, the trail, the killings. "She's gone too far, Jon," she said. "She's killing for justice, yes, but justice with no trial is just vengeance with pretty words." Jon stared at the fire. "She always had that in her, since she was little. Remember when she beat that butcher's boy half to death for stealing an apple? She was 10. She hasn't changed." Jon left King's Landing with no guards, no banners, just Ghost by his side and the memory of a sister who used to laugh. He followed the stories, found the path of bodies, the cryptic messages, the symbols in blood. And then, in a ruined sept near the Trident, he found her. She was wearing King Robert's face. When she saw him, she didn't move. He didn't raise his sword. They just stood there. Then Arya spoke through the face of a dead king. "You came to kill me?" "I came to talk," Jon said. She removed the mask. Her face was thinner, harder, her eyes darker than he'd remembered. "You look like him now," she said. "Like Ned." Jon shook his head. "I look like a man who's tired of watching his family fall apart." They sat beneath the shattered windows of the sept. Arya didn't apologize. Jon didn't ask her to. Instead, he asked, "What are you building?" She answered without blinking. "A new law, one written in fear, one that doesn't care about birth or coin, only deeds. That's not peace. It's order." Built on death. Arya looked away. Better than a throne built on lies. They sat in silence again. Then Jon asked the only question that mattered. Would you kill me? Arya didn't answer right away, but finally she whispered, if you turned into what they are. I wouldn't hesitate. And if I stood in your way? She looked him in the eyes truly deeply. Her lip trembled. I'd try to forgive you first. Jon Snow didn't try to stop her that night. He let her walk back into the shadows, knowing the weight of what must come. He didn't follow her. He didn't draw his blade. He simply watched, as one would a fire burning in the far distance. Too hot to touch, too bright to ignore. But he knew Arya's story could only end one way. And so did she. Arya traveled north again. Not to flee, not to hide, to return. She brought Illyra with her, now nearly a reflection of who Arya used to be, before the House of Black and White, before Needle, before the long nights of death and discipline. But unlike Arya, Illyra had never known innocence. She didn't wear kings' faces yet, but she wore their ideas, their ruthlessness, their hunger. Arya was proud of her, and afraid of her. Winterfell welcomed Arya with confusion and dread. The people remembered her as the child wolf, the girl who rode hard and fast and laughed with mud on her cheeks, but the woman who returned wore the silence of a graveyard. Her eyes had forgotten how to blink. She had no name anymore, only titles, whispered by the desperate, Ghost Queen, Crownless King, the Lady of 1,000 Faces. Sansa met her at the gates. Alone, they stood beneath the falling snow. 2 daughters of Ned Stark, one wrapped in northern furs, the other in a silence so heavy it crushed the air. You came back to die? Sansa asked. Arya shook her head. To see it one last time, before I bury it. I won't let you destroy the North. I'm not here for the North, Arya said. I'm here for the end. Sansa narrowed her eyes. Whose end? Arya's voice dropped like an axe. Mine. Illyra tried to protest, but Arya silenced her with one look. That night Arya walked into the crypts of Winterfell, alone, no face on her, no mask, no magic, just Arya Stark. She knelt before her father's statue. The stone lips, always so still, seemed to whisper in her ears, this is not who we are. And Arya, who had worn 100 voices, stolen 100 skins, delivered 100 judgments, finally cried like a girl again. Not a killer, not a queen, just a daughter. Footsteps echoed behind her. Jon. He didn't speak at first. He just stood beside her, staring at the cold face of Ned Stark. Then he said, She's gone too far. Arya nodded. She'll do worse, Jon added. You trained her too well. I trained her like I was trained. That's the problem. They both knew what needed to be done, not because they wanted to, because it was the only way left. At dawn, Arya handed Jon a scroll. Her confession, every name, every act, every drop of blood she'd spilled. She placed it in Sansa's hands, who read it with tears she couldn't blink away. And that same morning, Arya walked beyond the walls, to where Illyra waited, angry, betrayed, ready to fight for the legacy Arya had built. You said I'd wear a crown, Illyra spat. You still can, Arya said gently, but not with my face. They didn't fight. Arya didn't draw a blade, but Illyra did. She lunged, fast, furious, broken. Jon stepped from the trees and ended it. It wasn't clean. It wasn't easy. It wasn't painless, but it was the last thing Arya ever wanted. To die without a mask. To be remembered not as a myth, but as Arya Stark of Winterfell. When word of her death reached the realm, riots broke out. The bloodborn scattered. Some called it betrayal. Some called it martyrdom. Others simply vanished into the forests, waiting for a new name to rise, Illyra's. Body was never recovered, but rumors whispered that she survived, that she wears Arya's face now, that the Lady of 1,000 Faces never truly died. Sansa ruled for many more years, with peace, with sorrow. and with the memory of a sister who tried to fix the world the only way she knew how. In the coldest corner of the crypts beneath Winterfell, there's a stone marker, no statue, no sigil, just words carved in silence. She had no name, only purpose. And sometimes late at night, the guards swear they hear footsteps in the snow, followed by the voice of a king long dead.